Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this webinar / working group. My name is Doug Flandro, and I'm from the Environment and Climate Network Committee. And I'm happy to present this information based on research that we've been doing here at the Environment and Climate Network, as well as at NAME, the Society for Museum Exhibit Design, National Association for Museum Exhibit Design. I'm just stalling for just a minute to make sure we have everyone with us who wants to join us, but I think we're going to plow ahead, and we're starting with kind of an introduction, and then at the end, the second half of the session will be separating into breakout rooms and having some more in-depth discussion with different groups. You'll choose your discussion groups. We'll go into that in just a minute. So I want to give you some background on how we got here. I have been working with the committee that is the jury for the Excellence in Exhibits Awards to help them define some criteria for sustainability or sustainable exhibits. And as part of that, we've been doing a lot of research and trying to define what makes a sustainable exhibit. This is actually the third webinar or working group. We've had two with NAME, where we've invited people to come and really examine this matrix that we're developing and give feedback and say, like, this doesn't really work for my museum, or you should go further in this area. And so this is an opportunity to do this with the Environment and Climate Network. So thank you for joining. I hope that we can share some new research or some new information that you'll learn something here, and we hope that you will also give us some good feedback. So let me start by giving a little presentation on some of the things that we've been researching and that we're looking at on what makes a sustainable museum. And we'll have a lot of time for comments and questions at the end of the session too. So as we're looking at sustainability in museums, we've divided it into three major categories. The first is environmental justice. The second is reducing carbon footprint, and this would involve energy reduction as well as embodied carbon as well as operational carbon. And then the third category is avoiding materials with toxic chemicals, and these could be toxic chemicals in the production of the material that we're using as a building up, an element in our building our museum exhibits, where it could be something so that it's actually there in site, or something that's released into the environment during the production, or even the end of life in the landfill. So let's see. So as we're looking at environmental justice, you might think, like, why or how is environmental justice linked with sustainability or sustainable exhibits? So the definition of environmental justice is meaningful involvement for all people, regardless of race, color, or national origin, or income, with respect to decisions about the environment. And this is, clearly not the case right now. This is a picture of the water in Flint, Michigan, compared to the water in Detroit, Michigan. So the same degree of protection from all environmental hazards is not something we enjoy right now, all as a people. So how does this work with, how does this apply to museum exhibits? This is a little case study. We're looking at vinyl, or PVC, which is an ingredient in almost all vinyl. So vinyl production in the United States is primarily...
Doug, I think you're not sharing screen yet.
Yeah, we can't see your screen.
Oh, okay. Thank you. It's showing, okay. It might be that I had two slideshows going at the same time. Let's see if this works. Can you see that?
And Doug is working on that, everyone. Feel free to throw your name, where you are, in the chat, and certainly ask questions if any pop up.
Thank you.
Still not
are you able to
seeing
see? Still not seeing it. Okay. Let's see. right, let me try one more time. I apologize for the technical hiccups.
I think we have it.
All right, great. So let's see. I'm just going to show you the water in Flint, Michigan, and versus Detroit, and then we'll skip ahead. So the problem with vinyl PVC, this is often used in exhibits in graphics, but it's used in other ways too. Sintra panels are an expanded PVC, vinyl murals. So all of this PVC is, or I would say the majority of it is produced in a place called Cancer Alley in Louisiana, where there are many petrochemical factories. They're almost all situated in communities of color, and the dioxins from these factories produce a poison that contaminates the air and the water. It's actually forced some towns to completely relocate. There's growing evidence to show that this PVC causes cancer and endocrine disruption, so hormonal disruption, actually when it's inside, when it's in the environment, when people touch it. And according to several studies recently, race is actually the most significant predictor of living close to a source of pollution over income or anything else. So this really is an environmental justice issue. The fact that we're using this because it's so convenient and cheap, but it's actually harming people. So what can we do? We can examine the supply chain, ask where the materials that we're using come from, ask for transparency, avoid obvious offenders, and prefer companies that treat employees well and have a history of doing good work. This is also an issue to do with when we're looking at building materials and materials that we're using in our exhibits. Forced and child labor, we think that this is something that is not an issue anymore, but it really still is. There are, fortunately for exhibit designers, the products where there's forced and child labor are not terribly common in things we specify for exhibit design, but there are things like stone, rubber that are problematic for forced and child labor. There's some resources there's a new organization called Design for Freedom that's really working on this issue. And the US Department of Labor has a list of goods produced by child labor and forced labor divided by category and by known offending countries. So those are some, this is kind of a developing area, but those are a few resources to look at if that's something that you really want to dive into. So this is really hard work. It's hard to find, like rubber that's not harming people, or, and I think that I want to encourage everyone to not be overwhelmed by how difficult or challenging the work is. That if we just do something, then we'll, we're making progress. And so just choose something to do. And one way to really help with that work is lean really heavily on third parties that are working for transparency and for environmental justice. So two that are doing good work in this area are Cradle to Cradle and Living Product Challenge. Those are both certifications that look at the environmental justice, how they treat their employees, and some of these issues we've talked about with environmental justice and how the pollution, if any, is affecting the people in the environment. So those are great things to look at. They have libraries with products that they've certified to be environmental, friendly for environmental justice. You can also look for factories that are B Corp or Just ratings, or that have global reporting initiatives where they talk about how they treat their employees. And this is just to talk about, like, as we're moving forward, it's so important to make sure that the Black, Indigenous, and people of color are part of the decision-making process. So often, we've been in rooms where we're talking about environmental justice, and all the people in the room are white, which, it's great that we all need advocates, and, it's great that we're all trying to do this work. But really, if we diversify the team, the people who are in these underrepresented groups who are most affected by the harmful effects of climate change are really the right people and have probably usually the most creative solutions for solving the problem. And so it's so important to hire, as we're looking at subcontractors and people that we're working with on our design team, to look for minority-owned businesses as partners. and hire people in our firms or where we work at our museums. So related to this is climate change, right? So not only do we have the problems with pollution in the factories, but the hazards of climate change most severely affect the most vulnerable populations, which are usually the BIPOC communities. So let's look at, our second category is carbon footprint. So when we're selecting materials for exhibits, where can we go if we're wanting to reduce the carbon footprint? So the carbon footprint, just to define it, is operational energy and embodied carbon. So operational carbon and embodied carbon. Embodied carbon is the energy that it takes and the carbon emissions that are produced when you are creating the materials, or maybe even creating the exhibit. And the operational, so that's the embodied carbon. The operational energy is the electricity that is used when you're actually running the exhibit. And you can see here that this is not exhibits, this is for buildings, but this is just to give you an idea that this is right now, the building operations take up 28%, or they're producing 28% of the global carbon emissions. But as buildings are getting more and more efficient, the embodied carbon is becoming more and more important. So there's a lot of third-party certifications and transparency efforts to really examine how much energy it takes to create materials and help us select the lowest embodied carbon options. So this is, again, just defining embodied carbon. So it's the raw material, the extraction, the construction, the use, and the end of life is all factored into the embodied carbon. So you might see this as you're selecting flooring materials or other building materials, that they have something called an EPD. EPD is an environmental product declaration. And the goal of the EPD is to closely examine the global warming potential and the carbon impact of that material from the beginning, from extraction through its life to you hear cradle to grave. It means from extraction to when it's done, when it's in the landfill. Or cradle to cradle means that you're actually reusing that material, and it's kind of a circular process. So both of those talk about the carbon footprint of the material. And so anytime we can reduce, reuse, recycle, this is speaking to the goal of reducing carbon footprint. One great way to do this is using salvage much more in our exhibits. This is an example from the OWOW Science Center in Youngstown, Ohio, where they moved to a new space, and they, instead of throwing their old sign on their old building out into the landfill, there wasn't a place to put it on their new building, but they brought it into the gift shop and used it as a great feature in the gift shop. And most of these casework in the gift shop is recycled from old exhibits in their old space. So anytime we can, like I said, small museums are great at this. They have to do it. This is something that it can save a lot of money if it's done thoughtfully. Just reuse as much as you can, and design things so one way to do that is to design things so that you're using screws and clips instead of nails and glues. So find ways to attach materials with clips and screws, avoid adhesive whenever possible. That just allows you to reuse graphic panels, repaint them, reprint them, recover them, and just use, getting the mindset of not having a demolition at the end of an exhibit, but a deconstruction. Find places for all those things to go and reuse as much as possible. That's kind of an idea of thinking about circularity and reusing. And then low carbon, one just kind of rule of thumb is that plants sequester carbon. They actually use less carbon, so you can actually have carbon negative things when you're using natural materials. So low carbon is usually, nature is also the most efficient recycler. So anything that biodegrades is great for low carbon. And so the rule of thumb is if you choose wood or natural materials over metals and plastic, you usually have a much lower carbon footprint. And then hire and source local. Anytime you can, hire artists, illustrators, suppliers local to your museum, then obviously you're using less carbon for transportation, for all of those things, shipping. Lighting media, this also is an embodied, well, this is an operational carbon, but this is still your carbon footprint. Please, please, please make sure. I think most people have done this by now, but if you haven't, if you still have old incandescent bulbs in your museum, replace them. There are lots of government programs that will basically pay for it. And you'll be using a much lower operational energy. And I'm just going to skip over this. Let's see. And one thing that more and more museums are doing are really looking at their how much energy their lights are using, how much energy their audiovisual is using, and even setting a budget or a target for how much energy are you going to use in your exhibit per square foot for lighting and for media. And giving yourself like a budget. And this can be done really easily. Some fancy buildings have building operation systems that will track this in real time. If you don't have that, it's pretty easy to do in an Excel spreadsheet. If you just take your lights, the watts for each light, and you can estimate how often, which ones are work lights, which ones are on during the time that your museum is open. And if they're LEDs, are they 100% or are they dimmed? And you can figure out roughly how much energy you're using in a year, and you can divide that by your square footage, and you come up with something called an EY, which gives you a ratio of how much energy per square foot you're using. You can compare these to baseline, set your own internal goals, and just start thinking. And this just helps you kind of asking questions to your lighting designers, to your audiovisual designers, and what are things that we could do to use less energy. So the third category is avoiding toxic chemicals. This is also hard work. A good place to start is for anything that is touched by visitors, and especially touched by children. And some of the most common offenders are PVC and vinyl, formaldehyde, and VOCs. So VOCs is a blanket term to describe many toxic materials, and usually these are things that are off-gassed. This is kind of the new carpet smell, the new paint smell. And so what can you do? You look for low or no VOC products, and look for something called CDPH testing, which is California Department of Public Health. And they have a really great test that analyzes the VOC in installed products that helps you see which things are actually low VOC. So similar to an EPD, there are also these things called HPDs, which are called Health Product Declarations. And this is basically you'll find this on manufacturers' websites as you're selecting materials. More and more companies are doing this for flooring products, paints, and all those kinds of things. This is an HPD from Shaw Contract. It's a carpet, and it basically just lists all of the chemicals that are used to make the product, and it tells you which are chemicals of concern. Let's see, you can see right here that it says this is 1,000 parts per million. And you want to look for things that are at least 1,000 parts per million. And the way to think about that is if you're looking at 10,000 parts per million, it's not very detailed. If you look at a Twinkie, that's just cake and cream. If you go to 1,000, it's much more detailed. If you go to 100 parts per million, then you're looking much more in detail of exactly what is in there. Another really great resource is this website called 6classes.org. This is something that, at our firm, we're taking time each month to watch one of these 3-minute videos. There's one video for each of these 6 categories. And they're really great at telling you what are common chemicals of concern and where to find them and how to avoid them. So that's at 6classes.org. And Red List, this is the International Living Future Institute is a great organization. They have something called a Red List, which is a list that they keep updating, which have the worst in class materials, chemicals, and elements. And they have a list of products that are Red List free, that don't have any of those chemicals in them. So it's a great place to look for products. They also have something called the Declare label that companies can look at. It also gives you the ingredients of the product. It tells you whether it's Red List free or not, and gives you some more information about it. Another great place to look for this is the Cradle to Cradle certification. Green Guard Gold is something that tells you, these are other third-party certifications, Green Guard Gold this is just VOCs, but it's a great place to look for low VOC things. CRI Green Label Plus is for carpets, and then GOATS and OKCO Tex 100 are for textiles. So here are some more sustainable resources. One thing to kind of mention are these bottom two, the EC3 and the Stitch culturalheritage.org, are really great tools for looking at the carbon footprint of materials. The bottom one is kind of in development. It's still, there are some holes in that one, but that one is the desire for that website is to really focus on cultural heritage and museums, exhibits, and things that were commonly used there, and really look at those and compare the carbon footprint to that. So that's a great resource. If you want to email me at dflandro@cambridge7.com or exhibits@cambridge7.com, I'm happy to share this slide deck with you and answer any questions that you might have. Okay, so now we're going to move to the next part of our presentation, where I'm hoping to get some feedback from all of you. So I've mentioned at the beginning, for anyone who's joined us since then, we're working with with NAME, and the committee and the jury that is reorganizing to start again the Excellence in Exhibition Awards. And as we do that, we are trying to create some standards for sustainable exhibits for them to consider in these awards. And so if you, I'm going to share this in the chat, this link, and so you'll be able to actually get to this website here. Let's see, in the chat. I'm going to share that with everyone. If you want to click on that link, it'll bring you right to this site. And that will allow you to click on this link right here, which will bring you to the spreadsheet. So this spreadsheet here is our kind of draft matrix. And let me explain how this works. This is actually based on the way this is set up is based on the JUST rating that the International Living Future Institute does, where they have a level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4. And what we're trying to do is we have all these different categories, and we've created some criteria. And level 1 is the criteria just allows any museum or organization who wants to start thinking about this and write down a plan. This is always, it doesn't really require much action. It just requires you to think about it and have goals for like how you want to reduce energy and lighting in this first example. So that's, anyone could get to level 1 by just doing some thought and thinking and writing down. Level 2 is, it requires a little bit more action where you're kind of emerging and starting to work on this. Level 3 means you have a really good handle on this. You're doing some really good work with sustainability. And level 4 is we're trying to define as criteria that will mean that you're really on the cutting edge of this. You're one of the few museums that is doing this. You're like leading the charge in this area. And so we've tried to create the criteria for each of these things. We're going to ask each of you to look at these different criteria and choose one of these categories to join us in a breakout room to really talk with hopefully 5 to 10 other museum professionals who are also interested in this category, and look at the criteria and say, there's no way my museum could do this, it's not realistic, or maybe you need to be a lot more ambitious in this area, or what are we missing? Like what should we be thinking about that's not here? And we're trying to get that kind of feedback so that we can go back to this jury with these recommendations for what makes a sustainable exhibit. So I'm going to go back to the matrix just quickly and just give you an overview. In the first category, I'm actually going to be leading the first one on energy use reduction, which is this first group, and the third group here, which is climate health, which talks about looking at EPDs, low global warming potential materials, and hiring local. And then I have 4 other people from the Environment and Climate Network who are going to be leading the other 4 breakout groups. So Micheline Gallagher will be talking about circularity, which has to do with design for deconstruction, salvage, recycled materials, and end-of-life plans. And then Rachel Moritz will be talking about human health, which has to do with avoiding toxic materials in museum exhibits. And then let's see, we have, let's see, Andrea Fraley is going to be talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And Justine Wiebold will be talking about funding, like who are the donors and the funders for the exhibits, and education, like what are we doing to help educate our museum visitors on what we're doing, you know, what we're working on as for sustainability. And one other thing to think about, like as we're developing this list has gotten longer and longer, and it seems like it's a little bit hard to ask people who are submitting an exhibit for a jury prize to do all of this documentation. It's almost like getting a lead rating or something. So one solution we have for that, and we'd love to hear any feedback you have on other ideas, is instead of asking people to submit on each one of these things and rate them for each one, that we would have an overall sustainability rating where we're considering all of these elements above, and the jury would then give each project a rating from 0 to 3. 0 meaning they're not doing anything with sustainability. There's no effort for sustainability. Emerging would be you have some commendable sustainable practices in place, but they're not strong or consistent. And established meaning you do have strong and consistent sustainability practices in place. And 3 would be this exhibit is going above and beyond, and the team shows a drive to test new sustainable practices. And so that this is our kind of solution to not overwhelming each team with too much paperwork. Please let us know in your comments what you think about that and all of these details. So again, what you're going to see when you go into a breakout room, you'll see one of these pages. You can click on that link in the chat to get to the slides. And we're trying to appeal to introverts in the group, so you can speak out in the chat room if you want, or you could just go right to the slide, and everyone should be able to just type in comments in each of these boxes. You can move these around, you can make them bigger, you can put them over on the side here and do whatever makes sense for you to make comments on each of these things. We're not recording the breakout rooms, so these notes that we're taking will be the only record that we have for the breakout groups. So please do, if you have comments, write them into these slides. We're gonna actually have 2 breakout groups, so you'll be able to choose one. We're gonna do a 15-minute, is that right, 15-minute or 20-minute breakout group? 15-minute breakout group. We'll give you 1 minute when we're wrapping up, 1 minute left. We'll come back and then you can choose a second breakout group. Hopefully you'll choose another one and engage on another topic. So out of these 5 categories, you'll have a chance to really go in depth into 2 of them. And of course, feel free to email me or any of us if you have more comments after that. We would love any feedback you have. And all right, any questions or anything that I've forgotten from my team here at Environment and Climate Network? I guess maybe
we're all set.
Maybe I could just say that as soon as the breakout rooms are initiated, you should see an icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen that says breakout rooms. You should see a pop-up. So let's see, Kate, I think is going to tell us as soon as the breakout rooms are initiated, and you should be able to choose which breakout room you go to. If you don't see that pop-up, then click the icon that says breakout rooms at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and then you should be able to select your breakout room there.
So I've launched the breakout rooms, so everyone should be able to see them at this point.